I think that the way that we saw it is that, we've been crypto natives / have been in the space for quite a while, and have gotten to see, different metagames come and go. And have also gotten to see different chains come and go. And when we started Berachain, it was, as you said, just very much an NFT project for shits and giggles. We had been around, DeFi summer, and then we're starting to see more interesting things happen with NFTs in the summer of 2021, and thought to ourselves, hey, maybe there's something new and cool and interesting to explore over here.
Hello everyone, and welcome to BlockHunters Voices, Episode 2. My name is Joachim Vuju, and I'm your host for today. BlockHunters Voices is a platform where we explore the journeys, stories, and insights of blockchain innovators and leaders, and also the technologies driving their projects. We are honored to have here with us Smokey the Bera, OG of the OGs, chief shitposter, and the co-founder of Berachain. Also, we have another great announcement to make. We will soon be inviting key people from the projects building the Berachain ecosystem to our series. Please feel free to reach out to me if you are building in the ecosystem. Hello, Smokey. It's great to have you here, my man.
Hey, man. Thank you for having me.
Great. So, let's get to it. First things first. How would you explain Berachain to someone who has never heard of it? Can you give a high-level overview, assuming they live under a rock, because there have been multiple times when my entire feed was full of Berachain talks?
For sure, man. I think one question I'd ask, just to clarify, is, would you want this to be explained in a manner to someone who is, more familiar with crypto, or someone who is less familiar with crypto?
More familiar.
More familiar? Sure thing. So,
Yes.
For crypto enthusiasts and users out there, Berachain is an EVM identical layer 1 blockchain powered by something called Proof-of-Liquidity, which is a variant of delegated proof of stake. So what I mean by that is a couple things. One is, when I say Berachain is EVM equivalent, I mean that you actually have the closest execution environment to ETH mainnet that one can get at the layer 1 level, in terms of opcodes, in terms of any of the infrastructure. Basically, Berachain's execution environment is one-to-one of ETHs. Which means that you can use a whole variety of different execution clients, whether that's Geth, Ref, Aragon, etc., to run a Berachain node and to run that environment. And we, have the, upside of benefiting from all the research that goes down from the ETH Foundation and from Ethereum over time. This is combined with using Comet BFT under the hood for single slot finality, allowing us to, take advantage of some features that will actually be coming in the ETH roadmap down the road. And that's the part that people probably know a little bit less about Berachain, in that we don't always spend our time yelling about the tech stack itself from the rooftops. The part that I think Berachain is best known for, and the part that ends up being very interesting, is what we call proof of liquidity. And proof of liquidity is a Sybil resistance mechanism that effectively means that value flows and inflation and block rewards on Berachain primarily flow towards applications and users in the ecosystem. And this is really meant to solve the problem of, I'd say, lack of alignment between liquidity and security at the chain level that you see in the majority of proof-of-stake chains, which is to say that when a user has a given amount of capital, they are effectively given a choice to either put that capital towards, staking with the validator, or towards LPing and providing liquidity in a DEX, a lending market, something of the sort on-chain, and contributing to sort of like on-chain useful liquidity. So, of course, there's stuff like LSTs and whatnot that move this in the right direction, but they're very sort of specific to a given class of tokens. And really what Berachain allows you to do is generalize / use any form of palatable and utilizable liquidity and turn that into a form of security. So you don't really have to make that choice, but rather by contributing active liquidity to the ecosystem, you're also helping to secure the network and its incentives. So hopefully that helps as a little bit of context. What we really see this meaning over a long term is that right now, I'd say in a lot of proof-of-stake chains, the value tends to be accrued to, the validators if it's a straight up proof of stake chain, or validators and users if it's a delegated proof of stake chain. What Berachain actually does is forces validators to collaborate with protocols on the chain and actually flow the block rewards vertically, such that the block rewards and the incentives in the ecosystem are going from the validators to the applications to their users, which we hope ultimately turns Berachain into a real accelerant for the application layer, such that it's the best place for someone to go and build a new 0-to-1 application.
That sounds really good, Smokey. Thank you for that. Let's get back to the starting point. How did the Berachain subset come about? I know it all started with Bunk Bears, a nearly free mint with a small supply NFT collection. How did it go from that to 6 more rebases 1 year later and now to a fully functional proof-of-liquidity layer 1?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one that we try to ask ourselves about many times. I think that the way that we saw it is that, we've been crypto natives / have been in the space for quite a while, and have gotten to see, different metagames come and go. And I've also gotten to see different chains come and go. And when we started Berachain, it was, as you said, just very much an NFT project for shits and giggles. We had been around, DeFi summer, and then we're starting to see more interesting things happen with NFTs in the summer of 2021, and thought to ourselves, hey, maybe there's something new and cool and interesting to explore over here. And I think that what we found more than anything else was that there was an opportunity to push the envelope a little bit, or to try something new that wasn't just your 10,000 profile picture collection of apes or whatever, and that can actually be a little bit more interesting. So what we did is we started the Bong Bears with no end game in mind, mostly just to see what could happen. And I think what really impacted things was that we raffled off the bears / sold them to people in primarily DeFi focused discords. So as opposed to these NFT communities where it's mostly people just speculating on random pictures that they find on the internet or whatever their favorite influencer showed them, we were handing these out to people who were pretty in the trenches and who were pretty I'd say active on chain and fairly sophisticated users. So of course those sophisticated users who are spending time in Olympus and Curve and Frax and Alchemix and so on and so forth would have a different set of needs and a different set of things that they understand, right? Many of them were chain rotators, many of them were exploring the best yield farming opportunities. And I think that as this community grew over time, we found ourselves thinking, okay, is there something that we can do that taps into the audience that we already have, that ends up being a force multiplier? So after the initial 101 / 107 bears, including the honoraries that we made for friends of ours, or DeFi leaders, I suppose, we decided to make those collections rebase, so that if you owned one of the first collection, you'd own one of the second collection for free. And if you owned those two, then you'd get 2 of the third collection for free, and so on and so forth. So what this actually meant is it really rewarded the initial holders while increasing the supply of these collections over time, decreasing the scarcity, making it easier for more people to come on board and effectively get involved in the ecosystem or community. And as that group grew from, a couple, 100 people to, low thousands, we interacted with the community. We spent a whole bunch of time in the Discord, and we found ourselves, effectively helping to answer logical questions that we ourselves had asked in the past, namely around that lack of alignment between liquidity and security that was mentioned. Because we had people thinking, hey, I want to run a node. And then on the other hand, we had people saying, hey, I want to LP in this new project, right? And, I'd say that Lido and the LST ecosystem and EigenLayer and stuff have evolved quite a lot more to date. And I think that Steth, et cetera, is much more commonly seen within DeFi, for example, and LSTs are broadly better known. But at the time, I think the adoption curve was still, a lot lower than it was at the moment. And we still also found ourselves subscribing to the idea that really economic stake or security is really just a function of the amount of money underpinning a position, right? When you're slashed, you're losing money. I don't think you necessarily lose sleep a ton over whether it is money in the form of ETH or SOL or Bitcoin or whatever it is. And we thought to ourselves there was a massive opportunity to find a real unlock from a capital efficiency point of view by building this. And I guess one last thing I'd add there is that we talked to, and we had lots of friends in these communities who were active builders, right? And we're thinking about different networks and different places they might want to deploy on, whether that was AVAX, which was hot for some time, or Arbitrum, or, Aurora by Near, and so on and so forth. And what we learned very quickly was that there was very little reason for a group to choose to deploy on chain A versus chain B, apart from just sort of filling a very obvious primitive gap in an ecosystem. For example, if there wasn't a lending market on AVAX or something, right? Versus actually you know what I mean, or they were just being like bribed by grants. There really wasn't any reason for that application to say, hey, I need to be on chain A versus chain B, and this chain benefits me. Like I am gaining some advantage from being on this chain, apart from just a hype cycle. And we thought to ourselves, was there a way that we could also combat that? And that's very much, I think, that set of experiences or that set of inputs is what helps to inform proof of liquidity.
That is very interesting what you've told me, because I noticed in a tweet that you said the majority of the current Berachain team are there from the day one Discord from Bong Bears.
Yeah, you've got it, man. I don't know if I can say majority, but I can say because the team's pretty big now. But I can say that of my business development / growth team, I think that close to just less than half are folks who we met through the community first, not just because they applied on a job site or not just because someone introduced us, but actually because we saw them shit posting and taking part in the Discord for a while before we realized that there might be a good fit for them on the team.
Yeah, you already have the network built. And how many Beras were there in the beginning building Bong Bears, and how many Beras are there today?
Yeah, so at first it was just myself and Papa, and then we brought on our technical co-founder Dev, and then we brought on our product-focused co-founder Home. So there were 3/4 of us at the beginning, and now the team is approaching 60, I would say. So layer one, try to cover a lot of ground, and of course think a lot about international expansion while also keeping a very I know it sounds stupid to say lean, but relatively speaking, a pretty lean group. In that the goal is really to make sure that we don't have idle capacity, if that makes sense. So between the incubator and the Build-a-Bera team, between the product team, between the groups who are handling DevOps, between the groups who are doing business development and growth across APAC, the engineering node operation in India, everything in between, we've done as much as possible to cover the grounds and have seen lots of great folks join us along the way.
But is Papa still part of the team, the current team?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, Papa leads the ship, so he's just a more behind the scenes guy than he's less of a public facing person than myself, for example.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering myself. So that was more of a personal question.
Of course, no. He's just not a big Twitter guy in terms of or in terms of being out and about. But he's running the show behind the scenes.
At some point in time, I saw a tweet where you said you don't have a dedicated marketing team. How did you manage to build such a strong community?
I think a lot of it is, sort of that grassroots approach that I mentioned, right? I think NFTs have been one of the best tools for building culture and for building groups of belonging, if you will. And I think that a lot of it did start from that. And I think that a lot of it is also that when you have when you attract a number of like-minded people, I think they tend to continue to attract more like-minded people, right? So I think that what worked really well for us is that a lot of our initial community were people who were pretty cool, well-intentioned, a good mix of left curve and right curve, and that they're able to be very stupid, but also able to go pretty deep on different concepts. And that made it a lot easier for us to attract more and more of those people over time and see that flywheel continue to compound. So I think that's it. And I think that the other part is we really do simply try to do the work / put in the effort. I think that the community recognizes when you're engaging with them and when it's not just, some ghostwriter bot replying. I think they understand and they respect time spent in, Discord or Telegram or helping to solve problems and answer questions that people have. So I think I hope that it's a matter of perceived effort as well and willingness to just get work done, So yeah, that's sort of how I think about it.
Well, who are the first people that believed in you in Berachain?
That's a good question, man. I think that a lot of them were some IRL friends. So DCF God was a friend who sort of helped me get back into crypto, and he was a big believer and better on Berachain. Zeus from the Olympus ecosystem was a really good advocate, and a bunch of the Olympus community members really got behind it. I think that some of our friends from the real world, like I mentioned, so a guy named Sina, who currently leads growth at Babylon, and has gotten deeper and deeper into the space over time and has sort of been around there since almost day one of Berachain type stuff. And then there were a lot of just early builder communities and friends that were generally good to us as we were getting off the ground. So There's probably too many to mention at this point, and I'll easily miss a few. But I'd say a lot of that crowd in the initial Discord and a lot of their friends were sort of like what helped us get off the ground and get that activation energy.
Nice, nice. It's very good that you have such good friends over there. We know Sina, actually. We work with Babylon. He's a great guy. But most of the team members of Berachain are anonymous, but underneath that fluffiness, there is a human being. Can you give us a hint of who is Smokey the Bera?
Yeah, for sure. I've given a little bit of context in the past, but I studied engineering in the past in Waterloo. I was previously founding and building companies in the healthcare/drug discovery space. Raised VC and sort of went through that whole process before. Then spent a while in VC helping to raise and deploy venture capital funds, primarily into startups in the Bay Area, Y Combinator ecosystem, etc. And then worked a little bit on pre-IPO deals. And then the whole time, starting 2015-16, was also investing in crypto personally on the side. So I guess I've always been either a founder or an allocator of capital, or I guess sort of a researcher, if you will. So I guess I started very technical, and then, and I should say less code technical per se, but more like just science fundamentals technical. And then over time, transitioned more towards capital allocation and business development and strategy and operations.
Nice, nice, nice. So, looking back at the Berachain ecosystem, there are already 100 projects building on it, with many active users for over a year. How did you gather so many developers even before the testnet? Do you think the proof of liquidity mechanism, besides the memes, helped in this regard?
Yeah, I think that there's a few things there, man. One is, I'd say the kind of fun part is now we know there's like north of 200 plus projects, and depending on estimates, could be many, many more, but that we actually know are building and deploying. Even some, like there's one called Grand Conquest that looks like a Risk game, but like all the different Bera projects have countries on this like world map and are like trying to kill each other as we speak. Like that kind of stuff's going live in parallel, which is really funny. I guess what I would say is that it's a combination of a couple things. One is I think that proof of liquidity really allowed people to see like how a chain could help benefit them as a project as opposed to vice versa, right? It's not the chain trying to extract value from the projects building on top of it. It's much more of like, okay, the chain is actually helping to support the projects building on top of it. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is that we took a very hands-on approach from the ecosystem team and from like the growth perspective. I think we saw a lot of our I'd say like counterparts and L1s and L2s in the past that sort of thought that if they launched a chain and like launched a token, that everyone would come build on them. And I think we've very easily realized that that isn't the way that things actually work functionally. And that there's a lot more, upside in effectively being able to like actually work closely with builders, encourage them, help figure out their problems, and help solve them. Right. So I think that the simple answer is like A, we showed them why proof of liquidity helped beyond the memes. B, we built a community and we built like an ecosystem that had like evident users and had like people who actually cared about it, which I think is really hard to find nowadays. And that's how Berachain became known for its community early. And I think developers want to build in an ecosystem that eventually will have users, right? And then finally, I'd say that we took the time to really like seek out the best builders, work with them, and help make their lives easier, because we really should be an extension of their team. So that's how we think about it at the moment, and I think that's what's worked best for us.
Berachain's framework has experienced many changes since its inception. From the Cosmos SDK, you guys developed Polaris, which was live in V2 Testnet, but now Berachain operates on the BeaconKit, a modular framework that is 100% EVM identical with an unmodified execution client. I think you guys are the only ones to offer this at the moment. Could you provide us a short description of how this happened from your point of view?
Yeah, for sure. I think that a lot of it was, learning over time and a little bit of trial by fire. And this is an area that I can take very little to no credit for. I think this is a lot of the work that Bera and his team take point on, and that Papa really helps to project manage slash execute on. I think that the way that we saw it is that Polaris was a pretty exciting opportunity to try to combine the best of both approaches between EVM and Cosmos. I think the problem that we found there was that on one hand, there were certain reliances on portions of the Cosmos SDK and Comet that just did not stand up well under massive user load, especially when we found ourselves with more users on our testnet, and I'm sure a healthy number of bots in there too, than a Cosmos chain has experienced ever since Terra blew up. So that was one thing that we learned about. And then the other thing is that we saw was from a dev experience point of view, I think sometimes it's easy to miss the forest for the trees, if you will, because, for example, Dev and a lot of the guys in the core team are intensely technical. When they think about modifying or using stuff like precompiles and smart contracts, it seems really simple and an easy fix. But I think that when what we didn't do a good enough job of was really communicating that and helping to build the right infrastructure to make that very easy for app developers who are let's say more used to a classic Solidity interface. And I think that meant that just it added friction in the development process. So on one hand, we were finding ourselves, effectively rate limited / user limited on the throughput on the Cosmos side with Polaris. And on the other hand, we found ourselves, not giving developers the best experience. So we thought to ourselves, okay, let's take as many of these learnings as possible and try to put together a more elegant system that might have been how, it should have ideally been designed from the start. And I'd say while that first iteration was more 50-50 EVM Cosmos, I'd say BeaconKit in its current state is a little bit more 90-10 EVM Cosmos, if that makes sense. In that the most reliance we have on the SDK at this point is using Comet BFT consensus and enabling that single slot finality, while a lot of our focus has been giving EVM devs the most equivalent experience possible to mainnet. As we've also noted that as people have tried to deploy on different ZK VMs, AVAX, wherever it might be, they do find themselves with different with different things to navigate when it comes to opcodes, using different toolings like Hardhat, Foundry, so on and so forth, analytics platforms. Effectively, the closer that you can get to the experience that is the default, i.e. Ethereum, the better that you end up being. And then I think that what becomes very cool is that with BeaconKit, it is really meant to be a plug-and-play type system, right? So over time, if we were to explore, Snowman consensus or, Narwhal Bullshark type stuff, or stuff that we could really see unlocking major performance upgrades, while that is by no means as simple as pressing two buttons, it's something that becomes a lot more modular and a lot more easy to translate over time than having to build from scratch. And we think that there's a pretty cool opportunity for this to become, if you will, the OP stack for building L1s. So we think that there's a lot that can be done there in the future. We have some, I'd say, more abstract, longer plans, and I definitely haven't done justice to this explanation, but it's one that we think can really go farther down the road.
It's very interesting that you are talking to me about building an ecosystem that is good for builders, because you seem to have everything right now, from Ponzinomics such as ETH to DeFi like Kodiak and Infrared, derivatives and options like IVX, RWAs and Deepin like Puffpaw of Barber. But what sector would you say Berachain doesn't have right now, or where would you want more to be built?
Yeah, good question, man. I think that recently, and in the most recent Build-a-Bera batch, for example, we're seeing some folks that are doing some really interesting stuff in consumer. So I'm excited about that. I think there's two areas that still need a little bit more, maybe three. I think that we could benefit from more SocialFi, though I'm not entirely bullish on SocialFi as a category without incredibly good distribution. I think that because of just the sort of ecosphere that crypto Twitter and the crypto universe is, and how ADD it is as well, and how short the attention spans are, it's really tough to build a good SocialFi app without Web2 style distribution that allows people to actually break out of the crypto circles, right? So I think there's a role for it, but I don't think it's easy yet. I think that I'd like us to see more mobile experiences as well, and that's why we're looking at a bunch of collaborations with the Ton and Notcoin ecosystem, and I'm quite excited about what that can look like. But it's still something where I think that as mobile becomes an increasingly important and or default method for just interacting with the technological world, then I think that it's important for us to have as many of these applications and as many of these, consumer experiences, et cetera, being very accessible there. And then, even though I think it's also a little bit of a meme, I think there are some use cases where AI applications can be useful, and we're seeing a few. But I haven't found too many that immediately click for me and make me think, yeah, like that's it for sure. So that's just sort of my thought process for now, man.
For all the founders out there watching, what would you tell them if they wanted to build something on Berachain right now? Any tips, recommendations, ideas for protocols that would work well with others?
Yeah,
would they get any support from the core team?
For sure. So the way that we approach it is a couple different ways, man. The core team is happy to and spends time talking to each and every project that's building on the chain if they reach out to us. I'm sure every now and then things slip through the cracks, but we, very much do try to address the needs of as many people as possible, right? And, I think that's one of the things we pride ourselves on. We've seen a lot of groups in the past where, the foundation of the team is just inaccessible. And our goal is to be the exact opposite of that and to be there for the teams every step of the way. So I think that, what I would say is they have to think a lot about, what kind of product they want to be, why people want to buy their token or why it may accrue value or be useful at some point. And whether they can actually help to create a new category or create a new narrative as opposed to just sort of subscribing to one, right? So I think for some time, every pitch that VCs were getting was modular and restaking, and that, became popular for some period. There's a time where Bitcoin L2s were all that people were talking about. There's a time where, more recently, like consumer is all that everyone is talking about, et cetera, right? I think it's much more interesting to see how can you build a new category and be that first mover than it is to see how can I fit into this existing category, because there's a lot more upside in creating a narrative than just jumping onto one, right? And then I think the other important thing that I spend a lot of time thinking about right now is just figuring out how you get distribution to the people that matter, right? And I think that most apps sort of fall into one of two buckets. It's either you need 1,000 power users that are generating tons of volume and tons of fees and are whales effectively, right? And I think DeFi apps often tend to move towards this. Or you need hundreds of thousands, millions of micro users, if you will, right? And I think that a lot of stuff in gaming, consumer, social, etc., tends towards this, right? I also think that there's way more people fighting for the attention of the same, 1,000, 2,000, whatever it is, whales on the DeFi / high capital side. So the question is, how can you actually find ways to access people that either aren't in the space right now or are right at the edge of being in the space? So think about people who are currently playing poker online or sports betting or engaging in certain games like Counter-Strike that have an NFT component, etc., right? I think thinking a lot about how you unlock that next rung without going into the full meme of onboarding the next billion people is important. Because I don't think it's onboard the same next billion people right now. I think it's about just getting the work done and helping the next couple 100,000 people that are actually pretty well situated.
Yeah, but I also know that you guys have Build-a-Bera, the incubator program.
Yep.
Will there be a second cohort for that?
There will. There is actually one happening at the moment. So, for example, Puffpaw that you mentioned is part of that second cohort. There's going to be a few others that will be announced pretty soon. But I'm, incredibly excited about this one because while the first cohort was a little bit more core primitives for the ecosystem, and also I'd say more innovative and advanced twists on that than one would typically see. So it's not like a vanilla LST. It's not a vanilla conflict X. It's not a vanilla money market. There's all pretty interesting levels of abstraction to these that haven't been seen before. I think the second batch is a lot more just weird new ideas that people have not ever tried before and that we think can be incredibly interesting. So the first batch was very much, I've seen this thing before in some form, but there's actually a pretty interesting new innovation that's been made. So it's same but different. The second batch is very much, I haven't seen anything like this before, or different but same. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Exactly. That's the good stuff, man. But tell me, how did you convince investment funds to invest in some bears in Berachain? You told me that you had a good network, but I'm really curious how you managed to do all of this.
I think there's a few things, man. I think that a lot of it is simply being able to take a bet on something that looks different from the majority of things. Like venture capitalists are trained to some extent to look for outliers and look for power laws, though the vast majority do the exact opposite and just invest in the same shit like 20 times over, right? But I think that the smart ones do tend to be able to see like, hey, there's something different happening here, and perhaps there's a reason to pay attention, because often when something is weird enough or confusing enough and has this degree of cognitive dissonance where you're like, okay, it's a bunch of anonymous bears, but they've actually built something that makes quite a lot of sense mechanistically, and is also like, demonstrating a lot of social proof in terms of the ability to build something interesting. Maybe we should like care about this, right? So I think that a combination of the social proof, hopefully the proof that the team was able to produce in terms of like competency / our ability to actually execute on a technical and like product roadmap, and overall, I think just like the amount of excitement around what was being built really helped get people across the line. Because in most cases, I think like the question that a lot of crypto infrastructure projects end up having is like, will anyone use this? Will anyone care? Like, where will this go at the end of the day? Or will this just be like, another research project gone wild? And I think that for us, it ended up being something where it was very easy for us to answer the common questions that most people didn't end up facing until much later of, okay, will they be able to build a community? Will people care about this at the end of the day?
Nice. Thank you for that, Smokey. Let's also focus a little on the current development, the roadmap, and the testnet. What valuable information have you gathered from the V2 testnet so far?
Yeah, man. V2 Testnet has been night and day versus V1. We got past all of the annoying technical difficulties that we were having around that mempool bottlenecking with the V1, and I think it's been a pretty smooth experience so far. We have the vast majority of proof-of-liquidity logic live. The only thing that isn't fully like live yet is effectively the distribution of incentives from validators to delegates. But apart from that, the rest of the system is functioning. We'll be adding governance on there soon, such that people who are building protocols that are not just the chain native protocols like the DEX and the burps and the bend will be able to actually submit a governance vote and have their own protocols basically inducted into or enshrined into POL. So we think that that's pretty cool. I think it's taught us a lot about user experience, and like the block times are a lot lower. It's closer to 2 seconds. We've been able to scale the validator set, so we'll be able to support 256 validators, which is more than any sort of like Comet / Cosmos chain under the hood has been able to do before. So I think we've been able to make a number of improvements that improve accessibility and quality of life for people using the chain. And then it's just been a matter of like, I'd say, troubleshooting to some extent in terms of identifying the tooling that people need most and saying, okay, cool, this team really needs these oracles or this indexer or this automation software suite, etc. And making sure that we don't have to figure out all of those at mainnet when people are like scrambling around and trying to figure out why their tool doesn't exist, but rather we can actually get ahead of those problems and bring all those folks into the ecosystem nice and early.
But is it the bribing system live right now on V2?
Right now, the incentives / the bribes are live in that protocol. So, for example, like, but it's a limited manner, effectively, right? Like right now, it's not like fully unbridled. It's there's certain tokens you can bribe with, and there's certain pools you can bribe. But that'll actually be effectively the next iteration or the next like small upgrade that we push to effectively allow people to add new tokens that they can be bribed with, add new pools that can be bribed, add new applications, so on and so forth.
Yeah, we really want to start working with projects, with protocols. We are gonna announce soon a partnership with Bear, one of the protocols, because we want to see how everything is running from the point of view as a validator and then as a protocol, and to see exactly how the proof of liquidity will work, because
for sure
people are eager to see that, right?
Of course.
Looking forward, what objectives is Bera trying to achieve in the near future, and how do you plan to scale Berachain in today's modular landscape? Could we see application-specific chains in the distant future?
For sure, man. I think that The most important things for the next little while for us are honestly just buttoning up everything prior to TGE, whether that is our plans for an airdrop and any sort of token distribution events, whether that is our partnerships with custodians, market makers, exchanges, all that kind of stuff. Just because there's a lot of paperwork / legalities and just like logistics that has to go into that process, as I'm sure you've seen. Finalizing our validator set, making sure we've got all the right partners on board, which I think should be a lot of fun. And then I think that it'll be continuing the ecosystem development and making sure that we have a incredibly strong application ecosystem for people to come and use, and making sure that we don't pigeonhole ourselves, and making sure that we can, I think, really effectively educate people about what's being built on Berachain. And I'd say that more recently, like myself, Cami, Jack, our head of DeFi, Manny, Barry, other people on our DevRel team, Adam, who just joined, have all been spending more time on, trying to make proof of liquidity as accessible and as easy for people to understand as possible, because it's definitely a mouthful, and it's definitely not it's definitely not as bite-sized as some other things that we've seen before. So it's our job to find a way to make people understand it, and then from understanding it, hopefully start caring about it as well. So I think that those are the near things in our roadmap. And then, the exciting thing as well is we are starting already to see application-specific chains or networks spin up on Berachain. So because of that degree of EVM equivalence or EVM identicality that was mentioned, it's really easy for people to build an OP stack or Arbitrum Orbit style chain to Berachain without having to reinvent the wheel. They don't have to do anything differently than they would on ETH. So we're also thinking a lot about L1 / rollup / L2 alignment, and how we can continue to move the ball forward there, and make sure that experience on Berachain is pretty unique and something that people haven't seen before.
Sounds great. It's definitely gonna be a journey.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. I'm gonna go to two personal questions over here. So
Sure.
my overall feeling at ECC was that everyone was way overburdened. So my question is, how do you maintain a healthy work-life balance while managing the demands of being a leader?
Yeah, good question, man. I think that on one hand, I've been fortunate to be, or maybe unfortunate to be in a position of leadership for quite a long time. So I've always either been a founder or I've always been in a position where I have to be accountable to myself and, of course, to my team and those around me, right? So I think on one hand, I'm really fortunate to have a team that I enjoy working with, and people who I genuinely have fun with, because that makes it all more tolerable, even when there's lots of annoying shit to do. And then on the other hand, I think there's a matter of not taking yourself overly seriously. That's really important. I think I've seen a lot of leaders lose themselves, if you will, in trying to maintain some persona or some image or some infallible vision. And I think that that's the farthest thing from what I try to do. I would rather, be relatively straight up about things and be human in my interactions. Just because A, I think it's a lot easier, and B, it's a lot less bullshit. And then I think that there's certain elements in my routine that help make my life a lot, just easier, right? So I go to the gym most days during the week. It's great for, off-gassing a little bit and just, good structure and discipline. And it's something I've been doing for years. I have my dog at home, and having a dog is always nice. My girlfriend lives with me. I live a relatively simple life, in terms of work out, food, hang with friends every now and then on the weekends. But I'd say in most cases I'm on 12 to 14 hours a day at least. And I don't think that's a problem at all, because I also think that myself and many other members of the team are very much people who sort of have a chip on our shoulders, and people who want to go and prove something interesting and show that we can do things that are unexpected. So we're motivated to do so, right? So I think that's sort of what helps maintain it. Do I think that I have a healthy work-life balance? Probably not objectively, but do I think, you know what I mean? But do I think I have one that I'm pretty happy with, that I can roll with? Yeah, I'm pretty fine. I'm not a fussy person.
Good, that's a great answer, because I'm a pretty disciplined guy myself, and I like the fact that crypto is a 24/7 space. We have to get comfortable to that, but it's beautiful, man. That's why we live for, right?
For sure. The pace is a lot of fun.
And the last question here for today, Smokey, is what advice would you give to young entrepreneurs looking to enter the blockchain space today?
Good question, man. I think that the biggest thing I would say is it's like, we've maybe heard about the Dunning-Kruger effect before, right? It's really easy to think you know everything until you realize you know nothing.
Exactly.
I think that I would advise a lot of people who are young and new entrants to the space to really go back and revisit as much or learn as much about the history of what's been done before as possible, and what might have caused certain things to work or not work at different times. Just because I think we've seen so many different concepts become reinvented over time, whether that is, LSTs or restaking versus dual mining and stuff like that. And we've seen so many different areas where the space has converged on the same thesis, but with a slightly different framing. And I think that it's even, Cosmos and Ethereum, right? I think there's a lot of different things where, we're able to joke nowadays that Ethereum is resembling Cosmos more and more, or there's this there's this cosmification of Ethereum. And I say that as someone who isn't generally a fan of the Cosmos brand, right? I think that there's lots of ways that just studying history can be quite important in informing the future. But also not over-indexing on that and saying, oh, this didn't work this time, so this can never work again, right? So I think it's about understanding your bases, but taking it with a grain of salt. And then I'd also say, as a young founder, it's great to be able to just reach out to people who you think model you or model what you'd like to look like from a outcome point of view, from a personality point of view, from a technical point of view, whatever it might be. I think the space is very accessible compared to most, and it's very possible to end up chatting with some of your heroes, your idols, or whatever it is, just by replying to someone on Twitter or sending a DM or asking someone to put you in touch with them, right? There's lots of times where this won't happen, but I've often found that cold emails and cold DMs can go an incredibly long way.
It's more likely to happen in crypto than in a standard industry.
Exactly. You can take a punt and you've got a pretty decent chance that it can land. So yeah, I think that was one of the best way. That's one of the best ways to go about things. And I'd say that the best way to approach things is to be pretty audacious. And I've seen most young founders go one of two ways. Either they do a really good job in terms of learning from those around them and end up being sort of humble, likable, well versed in the space over time, or they just become complete dickbags and become the kind of person who gets attention for 6 to 12 months and then blows up and fades off the face of the earth. I think it's important to try to be more like the first than the second, and to keep a good head on your shoulders, because especially in crypto where someone can go from zero to hero overnight, it's important to stay humble and grounded, because I think I've seen a lot of friends and not friends fall into that trap over time.
That's great, Smokey, and thank you very much for sharing your incredible journey and insights with us today. It's been a very interesting discussion, and I'm sure our listeners have gained a lot of valuable information about both Berachain and its ecosystem. For those interested in learning more and getting involved, please make sure to follow BlockHunters and Berachain and stay tuned for more updates. We look forward to seeing the exciting developments that lie ahead Berachain and the block space as a whole.
Thank you, man. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Cheers, man.